Martin Scorsese is wrong about Marvel. He's just blatantly wrong. Don't get me wrong, I love Martin Scorsese. He's definitely one of the best in the business, and if there's anyone who has the right to say that something isn't cinema, it's this guy. He just got nominated for Best Picture again, and he currently holds the record for the person with the most Oscar nominations living. Martin Scorsese has made a name in the industry for being possibly the best director that is alive right now. So he's definitely got a name behind him. That's for sure. So when he says something like Marvel movies aren't cinema, people listen, and a lot of people share that opinion. And a lot of people criticize Marvel nowadays in general, which I agree with most of those criticisms. I've made videos on my channel talking about the things that Marvel's doing wrong recently. Marvel's definitely on a downhill spiral. There's no denying that. Although it's a few factors and maybe not just one, but I do think Martin Scorsese is wrong about a few things he says about Marvel. Me, someone who's an MCU fan, I know. So we're going to get into all of that today. What exactly Martin Scorsese said and how he's kind of missing the mark on Marvel. He made these comments about 5 years ago, back when Avengers Endgame was coming out, but I think they still are relevant 5 years later today and how Marvel is handling things currently post-Endgame. Hello, my name is Eli Hollingsworth, and I'm just out here reminding people that teenagers can think a little deeply too, and today we're thinking deeply about Marvel. Now, what did Martin Scorsese say about Marvel movies? These comments that he made are famous and they follow him around constantly. In fact, so much so that his daughter buys him Marvel wrapping paper for Christmas and I think gave him a Marvel birthday cake. It's kind of a meme and it's a funny thing that we all like to joke about at this point. The first comment he made was that Marvel movies aren't cinema and he compared them to theme park rides.
The problem is the amusement park films. They've got real cinema on the run, so to speak. It's very difficult for films of substance or attempted, how should I say? I don't want to use the word personal vision, but I have. It doesn't mean it's not entertaining, right? But these projects, where can they be shown? Where can they be shown if the theaters are taken over by the well-made, beautifully made, animated pictures, in a sense?
Probably heard that one. Then he released a longer article in the New York Times stating his opinion on it, basically saying, quote, that they are sequels in name but are remakes in spirit, and saying that there's no risk involved. He says that him and his friends, when they were making movies like Alfred Hitchcock back in the day, 60, 70 years ago, they're creating an art form. He doesn't feel like Marvel is correctly upholding that art form, and that there's a lot of talented people making these movies, but there's no risk involved. There's no exploration of character emotion or revelation. It's just the same thing over and over again, which I can kind of see, especially that's true in the modern day. We do have to consider the context in which he said this, though. 5 years ago, I definitely don't think that was true, specifically not with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, phases 1 through 3 were the exploration of the character of Iron Man. Although I do kind of get what he's saying about this, every movie has the same story. There was the exploration of a character, there was the revelation of them becoming a superhero, and there's no real risk involved. You're not fearing for the character. You know they're going to win in the end. The good guys always win. There was no risk. There was no danger. There were no stakes. And every movie kind of follows the same formula of the hero beating the villain and triumphantly being victorious. And I kind of get what he's saying. But also, there were huge risks taken in the Marvel Cinematic Universe back in 2014 with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Nobody cared about the Guardians of the Galaxy, only certain comic book lovers. And now they're mainstream household names. From Chris Pratt and Zoe Saldana, Bradley Cooper, Vin Diesel, their characters are now pop culture icons. That was a big risk back in 2014 because nobody knew who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. He was saying risk specifically in the movies themselves, but outside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it was risky to take a character like Tony Stark, who was kind of a B-tier character from the comics, and putting him in the forefront and having him being portrayed by Robert Downey Jr., who is now, again, a household name. The Marvel Cinematic Universe in phases 1 through 3, they were all building towards one story. It was one continuous story, and with every movie, it was this idea of expanding the universe, getting to know more and more characters, having it all culminate in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, having these various characters that are all living in the same world, that reference each other throughout their various movies, and sequels that are all interconnected. Climax and Infinity War and Endgame all came together to fight one threat that had been set up for multiple years throughout the course of the different movies. Now, this idea was unprecedented at this time in cinema. I just think it's pretty degrading for Martin Scorsese to get up there and say they're not cinema and they're akin to theme park rides. I think there were major risks being taken there. I think there was art being created there. The artistry of the modern blockbuster is still something that entertains people, keeps people happy. It's a nice way to escape the pressures of everyday life. Something I think is a very powerful quality of art is it lets you step into another world that's not your own, because our world is full of terrible things and wars and hardships and troubles every single day, and we all have to experience the painful troubles of everyday life. So to escape for an hour and a half, 2.5 hours into this magical land where it's not ours, it's like ours, but we could just follow a story with characters that we care about that are written well at the point of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, not every single movie was a masterpiece, but collected together, it told one big long story that was told over a decade. And that was a pretty big feat. That was something that had never been done before. And Martin Scorsese said that's the nature of modern film franchises. Market researched, audience tested, vetted, modified, revetted, and remodified until they're ready for consumption. Martin Scorsese, I think at that point, was speaking about the film industry at large and not just Marvel movies. So I think it was unfair for him to say Marvel movies are like theme park rides. Now, what I just said about taking an audience away to a faraway place, escaping reality, what I said a few minutes ago, if I said to that, is it not art if it entertains an audience and makes them happy? Martin Scorsese does intelligently refute that argument by saying, if you only give people one kind of thing, they start to want that one kind of thing. So he's saying if you keep feeding someone something that's ordinary, even the slightest change can become extraordinary. All right, fine, I see that argument. But now that we've come 5 years later and we can look kind of in retrospect, I think he was wrong about that. I think that people don't love superhero movies. Now that we've gotten really oversaturated with them, much more than we were back in 2019 when there wasn't a ton of them, now people are sick of them. Blue Beetle flopped, Aquaman 2, The Flash. People do have a standard for cinema. If it does entertain an audience, that's great, but people do also want to walk away with something more. I think that if you feed an audience something that really entertains them and makes them happy, I think if you have a healthy balance, as Christopher Nolan said, he doesn't really side with Martin Scorsese's take. What Christopher Nolan basically said was if you have a balance of the truly made sustenance, sustaining films and the entertaining, fun popcorn blockbusters, that's where you get the perfect harmony. You can have a little bit of a dessert, but you also got to get the nutrients you need every day. That brings me to my final point, and that is, I personally believe, and I'm just 16, what do I know, right? That nobody should be that level of, it's kind of an arrogance, in my opinion, to generalize a certain genre or call out a specific thing and say that's not art. I think once you start down that rabbit hole of deciding what's art and what's not art and what is made with passion and what's not made with passion, it just takes you deeper and deeper down a rabbit hole that just, it's unhealthy, I think, in the realm of art and the art of creating movies and that kind of thing. Martin Scorsese had the wrong perspective. He was looking at the wrong end. He was looking at the final product and saying, I think this was made by the motivations of the person making it were wrong. And I used to always say, you know, there's two different types of movies in this world. There's one's made with passion and one's not made with passion. And I think there's some truth to that, but I do think that might be making it a little broad, a little too broad. It starts even before that. If the person is passionately making something that was mandated by a studio, it could still end up not being the greatest movie ever. It goes back even further than the production process. It goes to the very inception of the idea. The studio saying, we need to mandate this movie because we need to make money. As opposed to a creative coming up and saying, I have an idea for this story that I need to tell. Let me tell it to the world. Now, I'm not an industry insider. I don't know how everything works in the industry. But basically, I do think that if a studio is mandating content to produce to earn their next paycheck, no matter how passionate the filmmakers are about making it, that's where it falls flat. And Marvel is certainly mandating a lot of content nowadays. I think we're past that, but previous CEO Bob Chapek, who basically destroyed the company, mandated a lot of content. That's where we got shows like She-Hulk or Miss Marvel, which, you know, say what you will, and I think it's wrong to criticize anyone for liking something even if you don't like it, so everyone's allowed to like their own things, right? But I think the reason we got shows that felt bland or not as interesting was because they were mandated by a studio with the intention of creating content rather than a filmmaker who said, this story needs to be told. Because think about the comic books. Why are the comic books so successful? Because the Spider-Man comics are stories that are this fantastical idea of a man who shoots webs and swings on them and has spider-like abilities. It's really telling this very human story. Stan Lee used that fantastical idea to explore the most human emotions of responsibility and different lives and the different things that us humans balance in our day-to-day life. So the truest expression of that on the big screen is going to lend itself to some very powerful ideas and things that I think Martin Scorsese would call art. But it starts with the individual filmmaker, not the collective film company. It starts with someone saying, this is an idea that I have for a story that I need to tell. There are countless movies based on books. They read the book and they went, this story needs to be told, and I can adapt it to the visual medium. Martin Scorsese looking at a movie and saying these are churned out products made to meet a demand. I don't think he was right about that specifically then, because the MCU tells the tale of triumphs and struggles and downfalls of these people who have these amazing abilities. Iron Man. We see the greatest falls of him and his wins and his losses because we spent time with him over the course of 10 years. That's a pretty big feat, and that's something that had never been done before, but such an interesting way to explore a character. Not in any seasons of television, but through this grand cinematic universe that feels big, that feels lived in, that feels populated and interesting, and we're always learning more about it. I think that's a pretty great idea and a pretty awesome cinematic exploration. Martin Scorsese, to label that, this 10-year-long process of our main character, Iron Man, showing his full character arc. When Iron Man made that final sacrifice and said, I am Iron Man, snapped his fingers, and sacrificed himself to save the world, that was pretty unexpected. In Avengers Infinity War, when Thanos snapped and half of the heroes that we had grown to love so dearly died, that was pretty surprising. There are lots of twists and turns that happened in the MCU, specifically talking about phases 1 through 3. There was tons of new, there was tons of risk, and for Martin Scorsese to label that as a theme park ride and shove it aside and say this does not deserve to be labeled as cinema, I think is a pretty arrogant thing to do. Now, it's a free country. Martin Scorsese obviously has the right to think how he wants to think and to say what he wants to say, and that's perfectly fine, and I'm not grading anything he said. But I would say to Mr. Scorsese, Marty, to maybe re-examine the MCU, re-examine his opinions, and re-examine the intention that's coming from. Because I think Kevin Feige, the head mind behind Marvel Studios that was leading the MCU in phases 1 through 3 for the first 10 years, he really did have a story that he wanted to tell. And what's wrong with entertaining an audience? There's absolutely nothing wrong with letting people have fun, letting people see big explosions in CGI that, quite frankly, are very fun to see. I love seeing things blow up. I love seeing people fight it, duke it out with each other, and so much fun action happened. I'm 16. I'm a teenager. Of course I love that stuff. And I do think there was enough story to supplement it, to see the pitfalls of these heroes and villains and how they fight and how they learn more about themselves. And I think there was character there. There was emotion. There was story. Maybe not as much as some of Martin Scorsese's films, but there was enough to where to label it as a theme park ride and as not art is very dismissive. I don't think encapsulates the whole picture. Nowadays, superhero blockbusters are being churned out like it's nothing. It's basically a factory production. There's not a single creative voice behind these things anymore. The Marvels, She-Hulk, Shang-Chi even kind of are just made by a committee. And we've heard about this a lot from the Marvel behind the scenes, that there is a group of people who's deciding what gets made and how it gets made, and nobody else really gets a say to put their creative voice in. Now that is not art, because it starts with the very first inception, with a studio mandating a project that isn't exactly a story that needs to be told, but it could generate some content, so let's get it out there. That mindset is not creating art, that's creating content. Those are two very separate things. And I think they're shifting back to kind of getting back to a story, but they're very much creating a lot of content. And Martin Scorsese was very right in saying that when that happens, that is definitely not art. But these comments came 5 years ago. Martin Scorsese had no idea that what the MCU would be today. He viewed it as what it is today, back then 5 years ago, and I don't think it was that 5 years ago. So there you have it. There's a dissection of some of Martin Scorsese's comments and how he's right, how he's wrong. I do agree with him in some aspects, and a lot of people's arguments about how the MCU is just churning out content, totally agree. But I do think there were some things that Martin Scorsese said that weren't exactly true. I think if we remember the golden age of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and look at how things were back then, there's a lot to be loved there. And there's a lot the MCU can learn from nowadays because Martin Scorsese is a very experienced and intelligent, creative, talented filmmaker. There's a lot that everyone can learn from that type of person. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was just me talking. If you haven't left a like yet, please. I'm just 16 trying to make a living here. So if you would subscribe as well, that'd be awesome so you can be notified whenever I come out with a new video. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.